This film was not what I expected.
It would be his directorial debut.
LA is a major character in the film. Like, this is a neo-noir film. There's a lot of references in this film to Chinatown.
David Lynch, David O. Russell, those were influences.
I guess I didn't realize it was going to be a film where I had to kind of analyze like you would a David Lynch film. It totally changes the movie. If you don't know that, you may not be able to appreciate it on the same level.
They bill this as a comedy.
Kind of.
There are comedic elements to it. You don't really know how to receive this.
They're quirky, they're different, they're interesting, but you like them.
Wait a second, is this turning into a fantasy?
Then it really starts to take on a lot more of that mystery and the film noir aspect.
Things start to get a little weirder at that point.
It does get more bizarre. There's a lot of symbolism.
The whole story kind of opens up.
I'm not trying to compare this to a David Lynch film. If you're expecting that level of complexity of plot, you're probably going to be disappointed. I enjoyed it even more the second viewing because I looked at it from a totally different perspective. Hi, I'm Heath Firestone with Cinema Technica.
And I'm Marc Loftus with Post Magazine. And today we're going to look at a new independent film coming out called Poolman. Poolman tells the story of Darren Barronman, played by Chris Pine, an unwavering optimist and native Angelino who spends his days looking after the pool of the Tahitian Tiki apartment block and fighting to make his hometown a better place to live. The film comes out May 10th. Why don't we take a look at a couple of clips?
Los Angeles, you've reached Awesome Aquatics. Have an awesome aquatical day.
Jack, what am I tasting here?
This is my take on the Langrisette cream. A little bit of cinnamon.
It's brilliant.
Mr. Behrman, welcome back. What is it today?
I have just finished a study of how we can make the bus schedule great.
Reggie?
Mr. Barronman, I'm June Del Rey.
Yeah?
Executive Assistant to Councilman Stephen Tobolowski.
Stephen's dirty. He's a threat to our great city.
Yeah.
I need your help taking him down.
Like undercover?
Yes.
I'm not really trained. Can I get back to you? I have to take this case. He's got a gun. A gun! I'm climbing a tree into a canopy of lies, Diane. Can I trust you?
Stephen Tobolowski is not what you think he is.
Is he a lizard?
Excuse me?
You waded out in the deep end, and now you're drowning right before our eyes.
I know it's dangerous, but I got myself into this. I gotta get myself out.
So that gives you a taste of kind of what this film's about. I have to say, this film was not what I expected, and I actually appreciated it a lot more on my second viewing than the first, and we'll get a lot more into that. But why don't we start with you, Marc? You actually got a chance to talk to Chris Pine and about that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's actually what attracted me to this film in the first place. I got a little heads up that this film was directed by Chris Pine. It would be his directorial debut. So you're probably familiar with Chris Pine on-camera work. He was Captain Kirk in the latest generation Star Trek films. He was in the Wonder Woman films. He was the voice of Peter Parker in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. So he's got, a real strong resume of on-camera or voice work, but had not directed a film. So I'm always curious when somebody makes that leap into directing, what the experience is like, as much as he has that production experience and on-camera experience as an actor, and probably knows a lot about filmmaking as a whole, but is it enough to make that transition seamlessly and smoothly? And what does he get out of it? So I spoke with him about it. It was a 21-day shoot. He shot on film, and shooting on film was something that he was really determined to do. But he said it also had implications where he would lose funding, in some cases. So he was strong about it, and won that battle where they were able to shoot on film and have it processed at Photochem. The film was shot in and around Los Angeles, and he grew up in that area. So it's very, very much his life is, I guess, reflected in it. And he told me that he depended on a lot of the different department heads, the director of photography, the editor, the script supervisor, the sound mixer. But here's a clip of what he said to me when I asked him the question of what did you get out of this and how did you, make that transition?
I learned so much. I've been in this business for, almost 25 years. I grew up in the business. I've never learned more about what it takes to make a film than I did in the 2 years that it took to put this film together. And I have now the deepest respect and admiration and compassion for so many more departments than I would have ever if I hadn't, directed a film. And to understand from a production design standpoint, like, can we shoot practically? Can we shoot at the location? Can we build in the location? What is it going to cost to transport the build if we, it was endless, the amount of information I was getting all the time. It was really profoundly illuminating.
If you're enjoying this, please like and subscribe and check out cinematechnica.com.
And visit postmagazine.com for more about production and post-production.
So it was interesting, Mark, when you mentioned that him being a native Angelino and that sort of thing. Actually, that's something that struck me about this film is this film, LA is a major character in the film. It couldn't have been done anywhere else. It's pervasive throughout the entire thing. And it's, in some ways, I think this film is kind of a love story to LA from somebody who grew up there. Like I said, Chris Pine, wrote this or co-wrote this film and was inspired by his experiences, and it's throughout the entire thing. So that was interesting, and it's probably some people who have a lot more experience with LA or have lived in LA are going to appreciate this on a totally different level than people who don't have any real connection with LA.
I agree. I'm an East Coast guy, so the architecture in this film, the colors, the style is totally different than the way we see things here. And I kind of wonder, like, how could a film like this be made on the East Coast? How would things have to change? So you're right. It is very, very soaked in LA style. I believe the Tahitian Tiki apartment block is a motel on Route 66 that they used for the shoot. And obviously they use a lot of different locations in and around. And Chris Pine said that the fact that they were shooting in LA and Photochem, was nearby, it made the shooting on film, because you have to have it developed and, there's a processing aspect to it that's different than if you're shooting digital and everything is immediate and you see it right then there. But he said the convenience of having those services nearby made it that much smoother as well. What are your thoughts on the location and the look and the style and the colors?
Yeah, well, I mean, it definitely had. Well, there's also kind of a traditional look for this. We should mention that this is a neo-noir film. And if you're wondering what neo-noir is, most people are familiar with film noir, but film noir is generally black and white, is mystery stuff, and usually post-World War II, and kind of has some gritty elements to it. Well, neo-noir, we have some examples of Chinatown and Blade Runner and some other things that are good examples of neo-noir, and this follows that. So it has some more modern filmmaking techniques, but still retains some of those, the grittiness, some of the stuff that you get from a film noir thing. So and so this film also, it wanted to look and feel like, there's a lot of references in this film to Chinatown, and I think they tried to emulate some of the look of Chinatown. Mm-hmm. They talk about Chinatown. The story in some ways, some elements, kind of follow a little bit of a Chinatown thing, which is, I don't know, there's a lot to it. We'll unpack more of that later.
Yeah, there is a backstory here. I mean, beyond his optimism and love for Los Angeles, he is always trying to make his neighborhood better. And he is meeting with his, town hall folks to just give them ideas. Hey, we could make the best bus routes better. We could do this. We could do this. And they're tired of hearing from him. They're just like exasperated by he's here every day. It's like 400 days in a row. They make some kind of reference. Yes, Darren, we know you're here again. What do you have for us today? You are only allowed a certain allotment of time. But he's an optimist, and he's like, hey, if I give them a couple of ideas, they have to take these ideas and do something with them. I think color, like you said, the idea is that this is taking place in a drought. So you do have that very washed out look to it, very hot. Obviously you've got the pool, you've got the apartment block and stuff. But Chris Pine mentioned that in a couple of scenes, there were palm trees that were filmed, and they removed them using visual effects because it didn't reflect the drought that he really wanted this to have. So even though, in the shoot, there were these, thriving palm trees, he felt the need to remove them to better support the idea of how dry things were.
Right. Well, and that's another major element which it shares with Chinatown and stuff. In fact, Chinatown was originally based off of an actual thing that happened, a water grab that happened in 1908. And so this is kind of continuing that whole thing. And it says throughout the whole thing that LA is built on a desert, and if without the water, that the dust will rise up and swallow the city.
Yeah.
And, and so you do feel that, they did a good job, I think, of conveying that visually.
I thought another thing from a first-time filmmaker aspect is like, okay, he is directing for the first time, but he's also on camera. So, he's splitting his time in front of and behind the camera, and that's a challenge. He's working with real notable talent here. Annette Bening was just nominated for an Academy Award for her work in Naiad. Jason Leigh, I love everything she's in. She was nominated for an Oscar in The Hateful Eight. Danny DeVito obviously has a long career, and his character reminded me a little bit about the It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia character, where, there's that bickering aspect to it and stuff, and dialogue intensive. And when I asked Chris Pine about some of those dialogue scenes where Jack and Diane and Darren are kind of like going back and forth so quickly, like where the dialogue is almost stepping on each other, he said he had in his mind David Lynch, David O. Russell, those were influences there when it came to it. And it came together not only on camera, but they use editorial to kind of bring that together. And they use some ADR and dialogue replacement to really tighten it up. He refers to that as the therapy session, where Jack and Diane or Darren are all kind of like bickering about what they see going on. And again, he references those directors as inspiration for it, how it was cut together editorially. He did some dialogue replacement, but he does have outside influence that I think you can see with the Chinatown, with the David Lynch, some of these other past films.
Well, and you're right. And probably the first time through, I didn't appreciate it on the same level because I didn't realize it was going to be a film where I had to kind of analyze and try to start to pick it apart like you would a David Lynch film. But you definitely felt like there was an element of David Lynch in this. I went back in and analyzed some of this stuff, actually having rewatched Mulholland Drive and understanding how you break down something like a David Lynch film. And it totally changes the movie. In fact, I guess when this premiered at whatever film fest it premiered at, it was kind of panned and people were walking out of the theater. And I think that's really probably has more to do with the fact that people don't realize that they're going into a David Lynch type of film in some ways. And so if you don't know that, you may not be able to appreciate it on the same level. And so you might just be like, what is this? I don't understand any of this.
Yeah, I agree with you. You had the ability to watch the film more than once, and you were able to pick up some of these cues that a first time around you may not pick up on. So I think that's a benefit. I think there's more to the film than what you may get out of it. And, David Lynch films are very much like that. I'm not saying that he was, hell bent on making a David Lynch film, but there's certain kind of influence there that I think we would recognize. What about the story itself? They bill this as a comedy. And there are comedic elements to it because of, just a little bit of the nuttiness of the characters. The characters are all very quirky. So that
they're caricatures. They really are. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, Darren is this pool guy. He's cleaning the pool at the apartment complex, but he takes it super serious. When it's time to clean the pool, he puts on his headphones, he pops a CD into his Discman, and he really focuses on doing a good job. You've got, Diane, who's a therapist. You've got Jack, who's a actor who swears that he's been blacklisted from Hollywood. And that's
director, I believe.
Is that what a director? Okay.
Yeah.
And he swears he's been blacklisted. Jennifer Jason Leigh's character, Susan, she was an actress. Now she's like a yoga instructor and stuff. So there's a lot of character within a very small group of people, all within that building. So that's kind of interesting there. And again, it starts off as you don't really know how to receive this. Is it a comedy? Is it straightforward? It does start to get a little more artistic and a little more bizarre, where you're like, well, wait a second, is this turning into a fantasy now or not? What are your thoughts on the story itself?
Yeah, I wasn't sure how to really categorize it initially as well. The characters are, funny, but but there's some dark humor as well. The characters are kind of absurd, in a lot of ways. That's why I say they're caricatures, and a lot of them, if you have a lot of friends from LA, you kind of recognize, these as actual. They're actually, people are like this in LA. Some people,
Everybody's got a story, right? There's always a story behind it, right?
But you're like, oh, that reminds me of so and so, So it's once again paying homage to people who are from LA and the whole LA scene and everything else. There's a lot of paying homage to different things throughout this entire film.
Some of my initial thoughts were, yes, the LA feel from a David Lynch, a Mulholland Drive. I thought of Melrose Place too. The drama, back in the 90s there, where everybody's living in this apartment building and there's all of these stories of what's going on with your neighbor and what's their backstory and what's the mystery and dating and, jobs and interviews and auditions and stuff. So I thought a little bit about, obviously, definitely more stylized than that, a little more serious than that, but in a quirky sense.
And then it really starts to take on a lot more of the actual mystery, elements and stuff in the film noir aspect, and then it really starts to delve into this. So I mean, the first part, like any story, is setting the creating that ordinary world and stuff, and letting you know kind of how things work. They're in the middle of a drought, and that's what feeds this entire thing.
I think that it really I was going to say, I think it really takes a turn when the June Del Rey character gets introduced. She's a woman that's working at the city hall. She knows a little bit about what's going on. She knows Darren is trying to make things better, and she's going to, give him this little insight into, hey, if you knew what was going on behind the scenes, you would really want to act on this. So I think things start to get a little weirder at that point as far as stylistically, and it goes from a little more of a straightforward, live action type of thing into more of a surreal type of experience.
Well, and if we're talking about mythic structure, this is where he gets his call to adventure. And, in true form, he is initially interested, but then he refuses the call, and then he does ultimately, go after it and stuff. So anyway, but that's interesting. I hadn't even thought about that until we're talking now. But yeah, she's definitely that catalyst for the rest of the story to develop from, and that's where it does get more bizarre. There's a lot of symbolism. He meditates, and when he meditates underwater, and he has these really clear visions, but he has no idea what these visions mean. And Diane, who is his best friend, but also his therapist, tries to help him figure out what these visions mean. And throughout the story, he kind of figures out what he thinks they are, and a lot of times he's wrong. But it's entertaining, it's interesting. When you really delve into it, it brings up more questions that are actually answered than are actually answered. So
yeah, I mean, up until June Del Rey is introduced, they're living in this apartment block. It's kind of an older building. Obviously, you could tell these people have money struggles and stuff. He's living in a camper right on the property, maintaining it. So you kind of say, well, is this an arrangement of some sort where he's taking care of the pool and they're letting him camp out there? But once June comes along, the whole story kind of opens up in the sense she's driving an exotic car. She invites him to her apartment. It's this really like stylized apartment. They go out to dinner. It's a really expensive restaurant. It's like, whoa, how did things take such a dramatic turn from, the perception of financial struggles to real, excessive wealth there?
Right. And I'm going to jump back just a little bit. Let's talk about the time frame when this film takes place. It's really hard to nail down.
It is. And I had heard that they intentionally kept it vague. I mean, he's using his Walkman. So you're kind of like, okay, is this an 80s or a 90s thing? But what are your initial thoughts?
There definitely are no cell phones or anything in this. You have cars, some from the 30s, which are, one of the cars I think is directly out of Chinatown, which takes place in 1937.
Super stylized that they've got.
You have other cars which are you have 80s cars in the background. You'll see some modern cars and stuff, but whenever there's intentional cars there, they're more dated, probably to the 80s. But then like there's all sorts of other elements because I was like, they're trying to keep it vague, but like they make references to different books. And one of the books I think was released that he's actually reading from was actually released in 2021, and other ones were further back. But the car that she drives a 1961 or two Corvette. So there's like, I don't know. You can't base it on the normal things. They're talking through walkie-talkies at one point,
right?
So it's definitely there's a total lack of that element of the modern, cell phone type of.
And at the same time, when I saw Darren pop the CD into his Discman there and go about his pool cleaning duties, I almost saw it like this is a guy who, and you kind of get that impression that he loves things the way they are. He doesn't want to see his town change. He doesn't want to see the evolution. Right. He doesn't want to see the old buildings get knocked down and new stuff built. He loves it the way he is. And I almost felt that, well, he's using that Discman because it's good enough. He doesn't need to go to an MP3 player, an iPhone and stuff. So, I'm thinking this is a guy that's content with that. But that may also play into the vagueness of the timeline. So you really don't know. You don't know what the answer is on that.
Yeah, I mean, there doesn't seem to be internet and stuff in this world and stuff, either. And like I say, it's not about that. It's about the story and not muddled by modern technology. However, I think the timeline is as it's almost like it's happening now, or it could have been in the 90s or the 80s, or I don't know.
Yeah, but you needed that. You needed a second viewing of it for you to pick up on those books and stuff. Like I saw it, but I couldn't have actually made note of it in just a single viewing. When you go back and start breaking it down, that's where you really were able to analyze that.
I mean, I recognize some of the things, like they were using walkie-talkies. I noticed that they were using a GL2 camera, which is from the early 2000s, and a actual film camera, so because he actually processed the photos, in black and white in his camper thing. So, it's like, so there were things that were saying, it's older and stuff, but then you realize, it was only when I really broke down and it really didn't matter when it took place for the story. It really wasn't, it was okay that it was ambiguous.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think it was we were dependent on knowing specifically the year that it was taking place. I think that was part of the style also. I think even the camper, it was not a modern camper by any means. The apartment block, you could tell it was one of those, 60s type of stucco buildings with the exterior entrances and the neon, signage and stuff like that, and the small pool and stuff. So it was very what you would expect from a certain time period there.
Now he is totally enveloped in the whole LA everything. He knows the architecture. He knows when things were built. He's like always referencing the time frames that things were done. I mean, he doesn't want it to change. He's part of the whatever the historical societies are to try to preserve LA as it was and stuff.
Right.
That's something he values very highly. He's kind of he's weird because I mean that in a good way. He's likable. He comes off as really naive, but he also clearly is constantly studying things, and whether it's philosophy or whether it's self-improvement or trying to understand human emotion or himself, so he's always trying to improve himself, but he also kind of seems there's a disconnect too from what he thinks he understands and what he really understands, and he kind of comes off as a simple man, even though I think he's trying to be something more. I don't know.
I agree. I think he does come off. I mean, you think, he's a pool cleaner. He's probably a simple guy, but he is reading. And even in some of the dialogue, some of the language that he uses suggests that he is an intelligent guy. He's using, words there that, don't normally make their way into conversations and stuff. So I think that he's deeper than maybe what you might get because he's got, this long hair and beard, and he looks like he's just like a hippie type, with not a care in the world and stuff,
or a
surfer.
Beach bum or something.
Yeah. Interesting little tidbit for you here. So when he's in his camper there, and you hear the phone message. It's a recording, and he's like, "Oh, thank you for calling Darren at Awesome Aquatics." If you look at the credits, at the end of the credits, there is a reference to Awesome Aquatics, and I believe it's Chris Pine's company, his production company that wrote, or he co-wrote the script with. So, just it's little nuances like there that you wouldn't know unless you really looked a little deeper into it. It's coincidental.
Well, and I think he really drew from his own life and his own experiences and stuff. I think there's bits and pieces of family members there. I believe his mother in real life is a psychotherapist, and I suspect that a lot of elements from the character Diane came from his mother. I think his character might be partly based on his father. I don't really know, but there's enough things that kind of point in that direction that it might be. It's hard to say, but it's. They say write what you know, and I think he definitely did, draw from the things that he was passionate about, the things he kind of obsesses about himself and his own life.
Yeah, I think this was a personal story for him with his, deep connections to LA and how he wanted to visualize that. And that's something that he can do because he is out there. Again, as an East Coast guy, it's a very foreign world, that architecture, that color, that style, that weather and everything. It's just very different. So I appreciate a look into that world, as an outsider. I thought that was an interesting angle. And again, the challenges of a first-time filmmaker shooting film, working with Oscar nominees, being on camera at the same time. It's like, wow, what could you do to make it harder on yourself? So...
Well, and the fact that it's his own story, that he's a writer on it too, is gonna, and they shot the whole thing, I think, in like 22 days, 26 days.
Yeah, 21, 22 days. He said there were quite a few pickups where, and he said that when I spoke with him, it's like, never underestimate the value of a pickup or another shoot there where you can just kind of like get something that you need and do it as an insert. So we spoke a little bit about maybe David Lynch influence there. And I thought while watching it, obviously there was that Mulholland Drive feel where this girl is heading off to LA. And I remember seeing that film over 20 years ago and talking to somebody else who saw it. And my interpretation of the film was so different than what their interpretation of it was. And I feel that this film kind of goes that way in a little bit, where it starts off kind of based in reality. And when June's character comes in, it really takes a more surreal twist there. What are your thoughts about maybe, comparison there? I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it was definitely something I picked up on.
Yeah, so I definitely felt like there was a lot more to this film, based on that. When my wife and I were talking afterwards, obviously we talked about Chinatown some. We talked about some David Lynch elements to it that, came out. And it made me realize that I didn't really remember. I felt like it had something that reminded me of something of Mulholland Drive as well, but I didn't really remember Mulholland Drive well enough for it to do any good. And I'm like, well, if we're going to be talking about this, maybe I need to rewatch those two films and then rewatch this and see, if I have some more insights into it. And yes, I definitely did. It changed the film. And I'm not trying to compare this to a David Lynch film. If you're expecting that and that level of complexity of a plot, you're probably gonna be disappointed. But
right. I don't think he set out to make a David Lynch film, but I think there are certain points that you kind of see a reference to there, and I'm okay with that.
So if you instead take it as that a lot of the things in this film are actually clues to the bigger story or what's going to happen, and you start analyzing it like that, in a way where you're unraveling this mystery in its own way and seeing what it really means, then maybe we'll appreciate that aspect of it, where before it may have been like, what's the point of this? But there is a point to it, and I broke it down, and there's a lot of point to it. So, Mark, do you have some final thoughts on this film?
Yeah. Again, I was turned on to it by the fact that it was a first-time director, and the challenges that go into that, and obviously a successful actor, who has a breadth of work under his belt already, and how easily that transition can go. And when I spoke with Chris Pine and asked him, what's next for you? Is it more directing? Is it more acting? He said he didn't have necessarily anything lined up, but he does have stuff in his mind that he'd like to pursue, I guess, writing. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of his own original content coming down the road, and hopefully we can follow that. As far as Poolman itself as a production, I appreciate that look into that Los Angeles life, regardless of what the time period it was, whether it's a modern time period or if it's, a little more vague or 80s or whatever it is. I just like the architecture, the style, the color, because it's so different than where I am. And him being a native himself probably gave it a better vision than somebody outside of the area could have. And the story was quirky, but it's got real talent in it. I mean, anything Jennifer Jason Leigh is in, I always like to see. Danny DeVito, again, obviously, a very well-known actor. Annette Bening, Oscar nominee. So plenty of talent there on top of it. So I would recommend checking it out just from like a stylistic standpoint and seeing if you can pick up some of the outside references that other filmmakers maybe use as part of their arsenal.
Yeah. Well, and so something I noticed about this film is it has a lot of likable characters. And, like I say, we talk about how we've seen films that there aren't really any likable characters or it's hard to pick them out. This one just has a bunch from that, they're quirky, they're different, they're interesting, but you like them. I think you even kind of like some of the bad guys in this one.
I agree with you because you kind of think that when Darren is meeting with the teams at City Hall that it's a him versus them type of thing. But when you see Stephen later on in the show, the Golden Girls show, you kind of realize like he's a likable character and Darren recognizes him as a likable person too. Yeah. So you're right. There are a lot of likable characters in there.
Well, and the characters, I don't know, they do have heart and the story has heart. And so I think, people might not know what to think when they first start watching it, but if you give it a chance and realize that there is, I've broken it down so I can tell you that there actually is purposes for almost every line of dialogue in there. Everything else, it's either world building or setting up aspects of the story or trying to give you clues about other things. There's some visual things going on. I think I'm going to do another video that'll probably touch on that stuff more because I don't think it really fits into this video and it's definitely going to be spoiler ridden. So look for another video, hopefully, on that. But like I said, I did like the characters and I did enjoy the film and I enjoyed it enough that I wanted to know more about it and delve into it and then break the whole thing apart, which, that's saying something, I think, that I...
Well, I like the fact that upon a second viewing, you were able to pick out some of these Easter eggs with the titles of the book and just references that may go by too quickly in a first viewing, but like on the second viewing, you're like, hey, wait a second. There's a couple of different things there that you might want to look into a little deeper.
Yeah, right. And it does benefit you if you've seen Chinatown recently or are pretty familiar with Chinatown and Mulholland Drive, especially if you've ever analyzed Mulholland Drive, because then you'll have a lot of those little clues that you can be like, what that means.
I mean, the Chinatown reference is obvious because they actually do show clips from it within Poolman. The Mulholland Drive, a little less obvious, but, if you're looking at something that is set in Los Angeles and kind of has that surreal, story to it, you may say, hey,
and a lot of old Hollywood stuff, and it's like I say, he really does love the subject of the the setting, being LA. He loves the character. You kind of wonder if there isn't an element of Chris Pine that if he wasn't an actor might be kind of part of him would be Darren Barrowman. It's hard to say, but I think so.
When Chris Pine has done the interviews, he looks a lot like Darren's character. He's kind of got that surfer look with the long hair and the beard and the t-shirt and stuff. So there may be more of Chris Pine in that character than you recognize.
Yeah, I agree. So no, I think it was fun. I did enjoy the characters, and like I say, I enjoyed it even more the second viewing because I looked at it from a totally different perspective, and I enjoyed it.
Cool. Well, Heath, I want to thank you for inviting me onto this podcast. It was a fun project to talk about.
Oh, thanks, Mark. Thanks for letting me know about this. This is a fun one to break apart.